Walter Ong. He wrote this amazing book called Orality and Literacy, Technologizing the World. And the basic gist is that when mankind invented the written word, it was not merely as an extension of spoken word, that it actually fundamentally changed human thought. And the easiest way to conceive of why the written word would have the impact of changing thought and fundamentally different is that in the oral world, or what Ong called the world of primary orality, there's no way to look anything up. There's no text to reference. There's no database of what societal knowledge is. And that places very specific demands on communication. So communication has to be memorable, because if it's not memorized, then if knowledge isn't memorized,
nothing is stored.
Nothing
this
is stored.
Conversation that you and I are having, like
it's just
back
gone.
then, nobody would hear
Right.
it. You and I wouldn't remember it except based on what was actually impressionable.
Right, and so there's a high pressure on the communicator to make something impressionable, and you think about what that means. So communicating in rhyme, for example. So think of like the lessons contained in the ancient epic oral poems. The Odyssey is one. It's poetry, and it's poetry for a reason, because poetry is more memorable. In fact, I think scholars think that the Odyssey was probably sung. Songs are more memorable than poems. It's very easy to recall song lyrics, even if they're the same length as poems oftentimes. Repetition is another technique that would be, if we were having this conversation, I would just keep repeating the same thing over and over again, hammer it into you, stuff like that. And in reading the book, it occurred to me that there are a lot of sort of similar demands with the age of social media, that the way we communicate online, some of how we're pressured to communicate, creates some similar effects. It's, complicated ideas that you sort of have to go and pore back over. That's not how you tweet, or those aren't the tweets or Facebook posts that go viral. What goes viral is a simple, clear message. Sometimes a hashtag can be incredibly powerful for making an idea spread. And so I feel like often our current age of media, in a way, feels like and has some of the same sort of pressures as the age of primary orality. What we call social media is this sort of broad world of posting things and commenting on things is not really the same as sort of the literate mindset, where you sort of think about reading some authoritative document, but more like the oral world.
In the oral world, thoughts and expressions were, in Ong's words, aggregative, not analytic. Sounds like it helps if the language is visual, if the language is descriptive, and if the language is very simple.
Well, one of the famous descriptions in the Odyssey, the wine dark sea, Homer's description of the water, and it's used like 18 times in the book. So why do you keep hammering that phrase? And it's sort of it makes it memorable. It conveys this image, association of like permanence with the thing itself. It's sort of this packet of information that sort of comes together and savable. And, we had this election, and we had a candidate who also spoke very empathetically, obviously, Lion Ted, Little Marco, the Phelan New York Times, Crooked Hillary. Yeah, who is also, it's sort of weird to think of Trump as sort of the Homerian poet of this election, but I think these things really stuck. I mean, at the beginning, like Trump calling Marco Rubio Little Marco kind of seemed, sort of funny. But then think about like how well that whole Crooked Hillary line essentially defined the entire election. And it really is the same idea. It's just so simple. It's so memorable. It's so instantly shareable. You saw like Trump's acolytes use Crooked Hillary in their own tweets. And it has the effect of, in a very small amount of space, really sort of conveying and packing in a lot of information.
Right. And in Trump's speech, you also included the next two examples. Actually, one is redundancy. You repeat something over and over and over again.
Right.
And in the analytical world, if you were to see that on the page, it would look kind of ridiculous. Why does this person keep repeating himself? I can just read it, okay? And I read it the one time, and that's it. I can go back to it. I can see it. The second thing is that a lot of this is about verbal jousting, which is obviously something that's instantly memorable as well. And in the oral world, these things do seem to work.
Right. I mean, you even like imagine yourself in a bar with friends. Ong talked about this. Imagine yourself in like an outdoor market somewhere, haggling. When people are around each other in the flesh, they want to one-up each other. They want to show they're wittier than the other. Sort of text and books have the effect of sort of divorcing the author from the text itself, and so the text is supposed to stand on your own. You're supposed to judge a text on its own arguments, not what you think about the author. In the flesh world, in the life world, and which is what all communication was back in the primary oral world, it was all one-to-one, and everyone wants to one-up each other and joust and show they're the wittier one and the funnier one and maybe put someone else down. And again, Trump was the master of the put down and the jab. I mean, this idea that language has become more combative and competition. I mean, this was incredibly well suited for him.
I think it only dawned on people over time that Trump was kind of playing a different game from the one that we all sort of understood before, especially after 8 years of Obama, who is himself a very analytic thinker, a very wonky thinker, and he has other strengths when it comes to public speaking, but he's very different in manner than Donald Trump. But I want to give you an example where it seems like a lot of people either have forgotten that lesson already or didn't learn it in the first place. There was an article in New York Mag yesterday by Jonathan Chait essentially mocking Mike Pence, who is Trump's vice presidential pick, because Pence has 12 times used the phrase Donald Trump's broad-shouldered foreign policy.
I hadn't even thought about like his own epithetical characterization of Trump.
I think he might have been learning it from Trump, who obviously is more practiced at this. But if you think about it, if you see somebody use broad-shouldered again and again, and you see it listed the way it is in that article, it looks kind of ridiculous. Like he keeps saying this, just because you say it doesn't mean it's so. And yet that's not how people process information in the world that you're describing, the oral world, because broad-shouldered is a visual image. It is something that's unexpected. You wouldn't normally expect people to be talking about something geeky like foreign policy in terms of how broad your shoulders are. And yet it kind of is memorable. Like it sticks out a bit.
On Twitter throughout the campaign season, numerous times journalists would share snippets of Donald Trump's speeches. And they did often look completely ridiculous. But it's silly. I mean, he wasn't writing policy papers. It was talking. And so if you're reading talking and you're judging talking based on how it reads, of course it's going to look absurd, but that wasn't what Donald Trump was doing. And people at his rallies, including many people who did not like Donald Trump, say watching on TV, thought that his speeches were quite magnetic. And one of my favorite examples, and I use it in the column, was he was talking about leadership. I think his quote was like, I'm a leader. I've always been a leader. What I do is lead. You tell people what to do, and that's leadership. Something like that. So he said like the word lead or some variant of it like 5 times in 5 sentences. I mean, it reads ridiculous, but then it works, and he just like hammered it home. And in the oral world, that's what you got to do.